The color of concrete, they were gray. I was cute but not pretty. And
look at Jamie Lee Curtis's face in that clip. Not the red carpet smile, not the polished, practiced composure Hollywood teaches you to wear like armor. This was different. This was the face of someone who has been carrying something heavy for far too long, and finally decided the truth mattered more than the rules. Because the moment she stepped near those microphones outside the memorial gathering, you could feel it. Not just grief, not the tidy, curated version we're used to seeing through designer sunglasses. This was raw, shaking, the kind of emotion that doesn't care who's watching. And then she did the one thing nobody expected. She said his name, Rob Reiner, not with reverence, not with the gentle, we lost a legend tone people default to when a famous man dies. She said it with a trembling fury that seemed to cut straight through the cameras, straight through the publicist that's hovering nearby, straight through the entire invisible wall of silence that protects old Hollywood families. You have to understand why that matters. Jamie and Rob weren't just colleagues who crossed paths at parties. They were children of legends. They grew up under the same suffocating pressure of legacy, the same expectation to smile, to protect the machine, to never embarrass the family name. They understood the code, so when she broke it, it felt like watching the ground shift. Because in that moment, she didn't speak in metaphors. She didn't hide behind vague, safe phrases like thoughts and prayers. She went straight for the story people were being told, the neat version, the version that makes tragedy feel random, like lightning striking, the version that lets everyone mourn without asking uncomfortable questions. Jamie looked straight ahead and crushed that illusion. She talked about the open secret. She talked about enabling. She talked about the kind of betrayal that doesn't arrive from outside the gates, but grows inside the house, fed quietly for years by money, fear, and denial. And that's where the story takes its first truly chilling turn, because what's been publicly reported is already devastating. Rob Reiner and his wife, Michele Singer Reiner, were found dead in their home, and their son, Nick Reiner, has been arrested and charged in connection with their deaths. That alone is the kind of headline that makes your stomach drop. But Jamie's words in that viral moment pointed to something even darker than the headline. She didn't describe it like a sudden explosion. She described it like a slow burn, a countdown. According to what she implied, Rob had been living in quiet fear for months where the world still saw smiles, activism, projects, public appearances, while behind the closed doors, something was unraveling. She spoke about late-night calls that weren't about movies or politics. They were about locks, security systems, whether it was safe to sleep with the bedroom door unlocked. Think about that for a second. The man who gave the world stories about loyalty and friendship, the man whose films made people believe in happy endings, lying awake in a home in one of the most secure neighborhoods in America, afraid of someone who shared his blood. And Jamie didn't say it like a rumor that amused her. She said it like something that haunted her. Then came the part that made the crowd around her freeze, because she framed Rob's death with one sentence that felt like the smoke filling the air. Rob didn't die because he was weak. He died because he was a father. That line changes everything. It suggests love wasn't just present in this tragedy. Love was the doorway. Love was the vulnerability. Love was the thing that made Rob keep hoping, keep forgiving, keep leaving the light on. And if you've ever known addiction or mental instability inside a family, you already know how that story usually goes. You don't stop loving them. You don't stop believing you can save them. You keep making excuses even when your instincts are screaming. Now take that dynamic and add Hollywood-level money, money that can delay consequences, money that can turn crisis into something you handle quietly, money that can protect reputations right up until it can't protect lives. Jamie's voice in that moment wasn't just grief. It sounded like guilt, like the kind of guilt that comes from realizing everyone saw signs and everyone chose the easier option, not the brave option. She made it sound like people in their circle knew things were spiraling, that they told themselves it would get better, that they respected privacy when they should have forced intervention. And then she hinted at details that, if true, make the entire tragedy feel even more intimate and terrifying. She suggested there may have been no forced entry, and that one detail, whether it ends up confirmed or not, lands like a punch, because it forces you to picture the unthinkable, a door opening not for a stranger, but for someone familiar, someone you would still recognize, someone you might still want to believe in. Jamie didn't describe Rob like a man preparing for battle. She described him like a parent still waiting for the miracle, still hoping the next knock would be the apology, the turning point, the moment everything finally changed. And then she looked like she realized all over again what that hope cost. Because hope can be beautiful, but in the wrong hands, hope can become a weapon. And as the cameras rolled, as the people around her tried to steer her away, Jamie's face said something louder than any words. This wasn't just a tragedy. This was a warning, and she was done pretending it wasn't. That single detail keeps echoing in your head once you hear it. No forced entry, no shattered glass, no kicked-in door, no a stranger scrambling through a window at 3 a.m., just silence, which means the person who walked into that Brentwood house didn't have to fight their way in. They either had a key or they were let inside, and when you really sit with that, the story stops feeling like a headline and starts feeling like a nightmare you can't wake up from. Because in families, the most dangerous moment is often the most ordinary one. A doorbell, a knock, footsteps in the hallway, a father hearing a sound and doing what fathers do. He gets up, not because he's fearless, not because he's trained for violence, but because he's spent a lifetime believing his job is to protect the people inside that house. Maybe he thinks it's a misunderstanding. Maybe he thinks it's his son coming back in a calmer mood. Maybe he thinks this is the moment everything finally turns around. The apology, the breakthrough, the dad, I'm ready to get help. That's the poison of hope. It makes you open doors you should never open again. And this is where Jamie Lee Curtis's reaction matters, because her grief wasn't just grief. It felt like recognition, like she had been watching the same slow motion collapse and telling herself, the way people always do, that it wouldn't end like this. Not for them, not for Rob Reiner, not for Michele, because Rob wasn't just a famous director. He was the guy who made millions of people believe in decency. He built a career out of warmth, humor, and the idea that love could survive anything. But love is not a security system. Love doesn't stop a blade. Love doesn't lock a door. Love doesn't protect you when the danger isn't outside. And what makes this tragedy even harder to breathe through is what's been reported since. Rob Reiner and his wife, Michele Singer Reiner, were found dead inside their home on December 14th, 2025. Investigators later described their deaths as a homicide involving multiple sharp force injuries, and then the next part dropped like a second body hitting the floor. Their son, Nick Reiner, was arrested and has since been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. That's not a scandal. That's a family imploding in the most brutal way imaginable. People hear something like that and their brains try to protect them by turning it into a movie plot. But nothing about this is entertainment. Because when the suspect is your own child, the crime isn't just violence, it's a complete inversion of reality. The person you fed, the person you drove to school, the person you defended when everyone else rolled their eyes and said, "He's trouble," that person becomes the threat. And the cruelest part is that parents don't stop being parents even when they should. They keep negotiating with fear. They keep hoping the next conversation will be different. They keep saying things like, "He's sick, he's struggling, he doesn't mean it, he'll be okay once he's back on track." Some reports describe a long history of Nick's struggles, including addiction and periods where his life was unstable. Other reporting has described mental health treatment as part of that picture as well, and I need you to understand what that does to a family, because it traps you in an endless loop of guilt. If you push too hard, you're the villain. If you set boundaries, you're abandoning him. If you call the police, you're ruining his life. So you do what many parents do. You soften the edges. You try to turn a crisis into something manageable. You tell yourself, "We can handle this privately." And that's the trap money can create. Because wealth doesn't erase pain. It just gives pain better hiding places. It gives you quieter solutions. More private doctors, more careful PR, more friends who politely look away and say, "I'm sure it's under control." But even in a gated community, even behind famous last names, the truth still finds a way in. Sometimes it comes in through a door you never locked. Sometimes it comes in wearing the face you once kissed goodnight. And now we're watching the legal machine turn because there's no handling it quietly after something like this. Nick Reiner has been held without bail. He appeared in court and an arraignment has been scheduled for January 7, 2026. Prosecutors have described the case as the kind that breaks everyone involved because family violence has a specific cruelty to it. It's intimate. It's not just a murder scene. It's the destruction of everything that made a home feel like a home. And that is why the detail about no forced entry keeps haunting people, because it suggests the most terrifying possibility of all, that Rob and Michele didn't fail to protect themselves. They simply kept the door open to the person they never stopped loving. And if you think I'm being dramatic, look at how quickly the world's tone changed. At first, people tried to frame it like a mystery. Maybe a burglary, maybe a random attack, maybe a sick twist of fate, but no forced entry narrows the world down to something smaller and uglier. It turns the question from who did this into who had access, who was close enough to walk in without breaking anything, who could move through that house without being challenged. And when the answer points inward, it forces everyone to confront the nightmare we spend our lives trying not to imagine. That the person who can hurt you most might be the person you've been trying to save. And here's the part that makes Jamie Lee Curtis's words land like a warning, because she wasn't just mourning Rob Reiner, the filmmaker. She was mourning Rob Reiner, the father, a man who, by all accounts, kept believing his son could come back from the edge, kept believing there was still a way to reach him. kept believing love was stronger than whatever darkness had moved in. That belief is beautiful. It is also dangerous, because when you love someone who is spiraling, you begin to confuse compassion with surrender. You begin to confuse forgiveness with exposure. You begin to trade your own safety for the chance that this time your love will be enough. And then one day, you realize the truth too late. Love doesn't conquer all. Sometimes love is the reason you don't run. And that is why this story is so hard for Hollywood to swallow. Because it isn't about paparazzi. It isn't about cheating. It isn't about a career falling apart. It's about the most private terror imaginable happening in one of the most public families. And the world is now looking at that house, that gate, that quiet street in Brentwood, and realizing something chilling. Security guards can't guard your heart. Locks can't lock out denial. And fame can't protect you from the one person you keep letting back inside because you still remember the child they used to be. Here's the part people don't want to picture because it's too close to real life. Jamie said there was an intervention-style meeting not 3 months ago. Not a dramatic Hollywood sit-down with cameras and tears for publicity. A real one. The kind where the room is tense before anyone even speaks. The kind where friends choose their words carefully because one wrong sentence can turn love into war. She said the people in that room weren't gossipers. They were peers, people who respected Rob, people who weren't there to judge him, but to pull him back from the edge. They told him what anyone would tell a man in danger. Close the door. Stop enabling. Protect your home. Protect your wife. Protect yourself. And then Jamie repeated the line that still makes her voice shake. She said, Rob looked at them and said, I can't close the door on my son. Think about what that sentence really means. It means he knew. It means he felt the risk in his bones. It means he had already seen enough to understand that love wasn't fixing this, but he still couldn't do it because there's a special kind of weakness that doesn't come from fear. It comes from parenting, from the memory of a child who once ran into your arms, from a lifetime of telling yourself you'll never be the kind of father who gives up, from believing that if you shut the door, you're not just setting a boundary, you're signing a death warrant. So he kept the door open, and Jamie said something even worse. She said, we watched it happen. Not strangers, not tabloids. We, the people who cared, the people who saw the signs and decided not to push too hard because the family name was big and the pain was private and everyone convinced themselves it was under control. She talked about bruises he tried to hide, bruises on Michelle's arms from months ago. And she said the quiet part out loud. She said the circle around them respected their privacy when they should have been screaming. That's the sentence that poisons the whole story. Because once you admit that, you can't pretend it was sudden anymore. It wasn't lightning. It was a storm everyone could feel approaching. And somehow nobody believed it would actually hit. Then Jamie's voice shifted and the air turned colder because she brought it back to the night everything ended. She said the harrowing detail wasn't only that Rob and Michelle were found dead, it was how no forced entry. And that phrase is terrifying because it takes away the comforting lie that this was a random intruder. It collapses the possibilities into something intimate. No forced entry means the killer had a key. Or the thought that makes your skin tighten, they were let inside. Jamie painted the scene like she was watching it in her head on a loop, late night, the house quiet, A doorbell rings or a key turns in the lock. Rob hears it, and in his mind, for one fragile second, it's not danger. It's hope. The moment Nick comes back clean, the moment the apology happens, the moment the family comes back together. She said it with love, but she meant it like a curse. Rob walked into that hallway thinking he was about to save his son again. And then she brought in a detail that made it even more chilling because it showed how close they were to turning the house into a fortress. She mentioned Tom Cruise. She talked about how Tom Cruise is known for security and control, and how there were conversations, warnings, and people around Rob who understood what was happening. The kind of guys who don't just watch monitors, they physically intervene. And yet Rob didn't want that, because he didn't want his home to feel like a fortress. He wanted it to feel like a home. That's the tragedy inside the tragedy. He didn't want to live in fear, so he died in it, and Jamie stood there in front of cameras with tears and fury mixing together, and it felt like she wasn't just telling a story. It felt like she was confessing that all of them kept believing love would be enough, that if they waited, the storm would pass. But the storms don't care about reputation. They don't care about money, and they don't care how many happy endings you gave the world on screen. Jamie didn't say it like gossip. She said it like a woman, finally admitting what everyone around that family had been too afraid to name, that the decision to keep the house feeling like a home, not a fortress, wasn't just sentimental. It was fatal. Then her voice changed again, and the story got colder, because she hinted this wasn't only about addiction spiraling out of control or a troubled son losing his grip in a single violent night. She hinted at something more calculated: extortion. She talked about money bleeding out of the Reiner accounts, not once, not a sudden, help me this one-time request. She described it like a slow drain that never stopped, month after month, year after year, like Rob was paying a ransom to keep peace in his own home, hoping that enough money would buy safety or at least buy time. But money doesn't heal what's rotting. Money only delays the moment the truth forces its way into the light. And Jamie implied that when the money is slowed down, or when Rob tried to put a boundary where there had never been one, the mask slipped. That's when the anger became sharper. That's when it wasn't just shouting, not just a frustrated parent story. It became a question that can break a person just by asking it. How do you stop loving your child? Jamie didn't answer it. She didn't try to pretend there's a perfect solution, because that's the cruelty of it. Parents are taught that love is unconditional, that love is the thing that never runs out, that love can pull someone back from the edge. But her words made it sound like love, in this case, became the rope that pulled Rob and Michele closer to danger every time they tried to step away. And this is where she stopped sounding like someone grieving and started sounding like someone ready to go to war. She made it clear she wasn't going to let this story be rewritten, because Jamie knows what happens next in Hollywood. She knows the legal strategy that gets whispered before the cameras even stop rolling. They try to make the parents the problem. They try to paint Rob as careless, negligent, too permissive. They try to turn the son into a victim of circumstance, a victim of pressure, a victim of a famous last name, a victim of mental health in the way people use it when they're desperate to soften something unforgivable. Jamie saw that coming like a car crash in slow motion, and she didn't just step in front of it, she detonated it. There was a moment in her statement, a moment people keep replaying, because it felt like something Hollywood almost never allows. She stopped crying, her face went hard, and she said something that sounded like a line drawn in blood. We need to stop pretending we don't know the difference. The difference between sick and evil, that sentence is a seismic shift in a town built on excuses. Hollywood loves explanations. Hollywood loves redemption arcs. Hollywood loves anything that keeps the story comfortable enough to consume. But Jamie refused comfort. And then she went even deeper, almost like she was punishing herself for staying quiet all those years. She hinted she'd seen signs long before anything exploded. At family barbecues, at pool parties. Small moments people brush off because they don't want to be the one who overreacts. A lack of empathy, a coldness, the kind of emptiness behind the eyes that makes you feel uneasy, even if nothing bad has happened yet. And she admitted the regret that's almost unbearable to hear. She regrets not screaming sooner, not forcing the world to look at what she believed was already there. Because once you believe that, once you truly believe you're watching someone become dangerous in real time, every polite silence starts to feel like complicity. And then she hinted at something else that made the air around this story feel even heavier. That after her words, there was a tightening, a closing of ranks. Like the old guard of Hollywood, the icons who've been untouchable since the 70s and 80s suddenly realized something terrifying. If it can happen to Rob Reiner, the kindest man in that zip code, it can happen to anyone. Their fame can't protect them. Their walls can't protect them. Their guards can't protect them from the one place danger can always hide, inside their own families. And that's when Jamie did something most people still aren't talking about enough. She didn't only mourn Rob, she made sure we felt Michele Singer Reiner. She described Michele as the shield. If Rob was the open heart, Michele was the barrier that tried to hold the chaos back, the protector who stayed calm for both of them, the one who saw the truth before Rob could fully accept it. Jamie described a moment, just a look between two women, where she realized Michele already knew what was coming. And still, they both said nothing. Not because they didn't care, because they were afraid. Afraid of what happens when you tell the truth about the wrong family at the wrong time, in the wrong town. And here's the chilling part. Jamie wasn't just speaking as a friend. She was positioning herself as something much more dangerous to anyone trying to rewrite the narrative. A witness, a living record of the slow motion collapse that led to those final moments. Which means what she said wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. And the next thing she revealed made it feel like the clock had been ticking louder than anyone wanted to admit. She mentioned a specific dinner 2 weeks ago. Rob barely touched his food, and he told her something that still doesn't sound like a movie line. It sounds like a man who finally ran out of denial. I think he's going to hurt us. Jamie repeated it for the cameras, her voice trembling, like saying it out loud made it real in a way she'd been trying to avoid. And then she confessed the most human mistake of all. She told him to change the locks. That's what we all say, isn't it? Change the locks. Install cameras, call a security company, as if a new keypad code can fix what's happening in someone's soul. But her confession did something important. It removed the idea of an accident. It removed the possibility that nobody saw it coming. It painted a pattern, escalation, fear, warnings, and a family still trying to pretend love could control the uncontrollable. And then she dropped one more detail that cracked the heart of it open. People had urged Rob to leave the house, to get away for a while, to let things cool down. But Rob refused because Christmas was coming. He wanted to be home for the holidays. He wanted the family together, even if the family was already breaking. That is the tragedy in one sentence. He chose the holiday dream over the survival instinct. And in the end, the dream didn't save him. It only made the betrayal sharper. What is happening right now isn't just grief. It's unraveling. Because once a story like this breaks open, it doesn't stay inside the gates of Brentwood. It doesn't stay inside the private rooms where wealthy families whisper and publicists quietly clean up messes. It spills out into the street, into the phones in our hands, into the way we look at our own families when the house is finally quiet. The image of the Reiner family, the warm, untouchable Hollywood royalty image, is being dismantled in real time, not by tabloids, not by conspiracy, by the brutal simplicity of what this story represents. And that's why it's hitting so hard, because we're not only watching the fall of a famous name, we're watching the representation of our deepest fear, the fear that love isn't enough, the fear that you can pour your whole life into saving someone and still lose, the fear that the person you would die for might be the person who destroys you. That's what makes this tragedy feel like it will echo for decades. Not because Rob Reiner was famous, but because the betrayal is so intimate, so unspeakably close, that it feels like a warning carved into stone. And then came the moment where the story shifted from shock into something sharper. Because Jamie Lee Curtis didn't just mourn. She fired the first shot. She signaled, without having to say it outright, that Hollywood was not going to circle the wagons around Nick. Not this time, not with this. Her demeanor screamed it. He is not one of us. He is not the misunderstood artist. He is not the troubled kid who just needs another chance. He is not a symbol of pressure that people can soften with sympathetic headlines. In that moment, she made him something else, the thing that goes bump in the night. And once someone like Jamie draws that line in public, it changes what happens next. It changes the tone. It changes how people speak behind closed doors. It changes how quickly the old excuses die in the air. Because the real currency in Hollywood has always been silence. But Jamie stood there and made silence feel disgusting. And that's when the story becomes unbearable in the way only real life can be. Because as this tragedy continues to spread outward, leaving confusion and grief and shattered people in its wake, the truth starts to feel like the only thing anyone can still offer Rob. Not a speech, not a tribute reel, not a perfect montage with a swelling music and soft lighting, just truth. The truth is the only respect he has left, and it leaves you with one of the cruelest contrasts imaginable. Rob Reiner spent his life making us feel good. He made us laugh. He made us believe in loyalty. He made us believe in love that survives the worst storms. He made us believe in happy endings so convincingly that we carried them into our own lives, and in the end, he died trying to live inside the story he gave the world. He died still believing that love could reach across the hallway, still believing a father's love could pull a son back from the edge, still believing that the monster was only temporary, that somewhere inside the child was still there. Until his very last breath, he tried to love the monster across the hall, and now the reality is sinking in, slowly and painfully, like cold water rising. Rob is gone, and the world feels different today than it did yesterday. A little darker, a little sharper, and a lot less safe. And here's what makes Jamie Lee Curtis's moment feel bigger than a memorial speech. It wasn't just an emotional outburst, it was a rupture. Because Hollywood survives on a simple agreement that almost nobody ever says out loud. We protect our own. We keep family business in the family. We bury the ugly parts under ceremonies, tributes, and beautiful music. And when a tragedy happens, the machine usually moves fast. It wraps everything in tasteful grief, edits out the mess, and gives the public a clean story they can digest. But Jamie didn't give them a clean story. She gave them the one thing this town fears more than scandal. A witness, not a witness to a single violent moment, but a witness to the slow motion lead up, the bruises that were ignored, the meetings where people warned him, the nights where fear was already living in the walls. The sentence Rob said over dinner, like a man finally admitting the truth to himself. I think he's going to hurt us. That line doesn't just break your heart, it breaks the comfort people cling to. Because if Rob said that, then this wasn't random, it wasn't sudden, it wasn't a lightning strike, it was escalation. And once you name escalation, you start asking questions that are painful, because they aren't about a monster in the dark, they're about the choices people make in the light. What did everyone know? How long did they know it? How many times did they convince themselves it would calm down? How many times did privacy become an excuse for silence? Jamie's speech dragged those questions into the open, and that's why the reaction from the rest of Hollywood felt paralyzed. Because no one knows what to do when the story refuses to be softened. They can't turn this into a neat narrative about tragedy. They can't turn this into a sanitized documentary about legacy. They can't make it comfortable, and deep down, they know why. Because if gates and guards can't protect you from your own family, then what exactly have they been paying for all these years? This is why you can feel the closing of ranks that Jamie hinted at. Not because everyone is trying to cover up the truth, but because the truth is terrifying. It means the wealth, the fame, the private doctors, the security teams, the gated streets, all of it can still lose to one thing: love mixed with denial, a parent's refusal to stop hoping. That's the part people outside Hollywood understand instantly, because it has nothing to do with fame. It's a human story. When someone you love is spiraling, you begin living in a place where every choice feels evil. If you help them, you might be enabling them. If you stop helping, you might be abandoning them. If you call someone, you might ruin them. If you stay quiet, you might lose everything. And the cruelest truth is that sometimes there is no perfect option. There is only the option that keeps you alive. Jamie's voice made it sound like Rob couldn't accept that. He wanted the home to feel like a home, not a fortress. He didn't want his son to feel like a prisoner or an enemy if he came to visit. And that is heartbreakingly understandable, but it's also the kind of kindness that can become fatal when the person you're trying to save is no longer operating by the rules of love. That's why Jamie's hardest line wasn't even about grief. It was about responsibility. We need to stop pretending we don't know the difference between sick and evil. Whether people agree with that framing or not, the point is what she was doing. She was refusing the automatic Hollywood instinct to blur the lines until no one is accountable. She was refusing to let the world remember Rob and Michele as victims of a complicated situation. She was trying to make sure their deaths stayed what they were, a horror, a betrayal, a line crossed that cannot be prettied up with explanations. And maybe the most haunting part is this. Jamie wasn't speaking like someone surprised. She was speaking like someone who has been waiting for the other shoe to drop, and now that it has, she can't live with her own silence anymore. That's why her face looked the way it did in that interview. Not just grief, guilt. The kind of guilt that says, we all saw something, we all felt something, and we all told ourselves it would end differently. But it didn't. Rob is gone. Michele is gone. And now, the only thing left that still matters is what happens next. Not in Hollywood, in the real world, in the way people hearing this story might finally take their own warning signs seriously, in the way changing the locks starts sounding like an understatement, in the way love is still beautiful, but boundaries become sacred. Because the darkest lesson in this story is one nobody wants. Sometimes the right choice isn't the kind choice. Sometimes the right choice is the one that keeps you breathing. And Jamie Lee Curtis, at 67, finally chose truth over the code, even if it costs her friends, even if it makes Hollywood furious, even if it shatters the last illusion of safety this town likes to sell. Because once you say it out loud, you can't unsay it. And now the world can't unhear it either. And maybe that's the most frightening thing about this story. Not the fame, not the mansion, not the cameras, the familiarity. Because this didn't begin with a stranger lurking in the shadows. It began the way so many real nightmares begin, with a family trying to handle it, with love trying to outwork a storm, with hope being used as a shield until it becomes a blindfold. Jamie Lee Curtis didn't just mourn Rob Reiner. She shattered the safest lie we all like to believe, that if you love someone enough, you can save them. That if you keep the door open long enough, the person on the other side will eventually come back as the person you remember. But what if they don't? What if the thing you're calling love is actually fear dressed up in mercy? What if the thing you're calling loyalty is really a slow surrender? That's why her words landed like a warning siren, because she wasn't speaking to the cameras. She was speaking to every parent who has ever made excuses for behavior that felt wrong, to every spouse who has ever swallowed their instincts to keep the peace, to every friend who has ever seen bruises, seen panic, seen the warning signs, and decided not to push. She forced one brutal question into the open. At what point does compassion become a permission? At what point does privacy become a coffin lid? At what point do you stop calling it a rough patch and start calling it danger? And as the world tries to wrap this tragedy in tribute, reels, and soft lighting, Jamie refused to let it be comfortable. She made sure we remembered what the headlines can't hold. That this wasn't just the death of a beloved filmmaker. This was a family collapsing from the inside, a home becoming a crime scene, a father's love meeting something it could not fix. Rob Reiner gave people hope for decades. He built stories where love wins, where loyalty survives, where people come back from the edge. And in the end, he seemed to live by that belief until his very last breath. That's why this story will not fade, because it reminds us of something nobody wants to admit. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't outside the door. Sometimes they're the one you keep letting back in. And that's why Jamie's moment matters. Because when someone born into Hollywood's royalty finally breaks the code and speaks like that, it means the silence was never protection, it was just delay. So if there's any legacy to honor here, it isn't a filmography. It's a lesson. Love is sacred, but boundaries are survival. And if your instincts are screaming, don't smother them with hope. Listen, because the world feels a little darker today, a little sharper, and a lot less safe than it did yesterday. And the most heartbreaking part is this: somewhere, there's a door that is still opened when it never should have. If this story hit to you, tell me in the comments what you think Jamie was really trying to warn the world about. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next story is even harder to look away from.